It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What is the kind of the chronology of the to-do list here? Because it's one thing to say, like, okay, the practice facility or the stadium or practice fields or whatever other things you might have in your mind is the most important thing for the ownership to do. But there's also the logistics of it. Because I had made the argument on the show last week that the practice facility was actually more important than the stadium because that's where everyone goes to work every day. And while certainly the fans need a great place to go to, if there's a winning team, like, there's a little bit of like, hey, RFK is a dump, but it's our dump. And like people will go. People would go to FedEx if the team was awesome.
Yeah.
And so if they can create an atmosphere where the team's awesome, cool. But then Michael Phillips came on and was like, hey, I hear you, but they got to figure out where the stadium is because that's going to determine what kind of facility it is. Are they going to do everything in DC, players living in DC, practice facility there, stadium there, same kind of thing, whether it's DC, Woodbridge, Loudon, Landover? Do they mix and match kind of like they have now, like a lot of teams do? So I think there's a lot of questions in terms of importance, but logistically also, Logan, like what's kind of the process and what would you be telling Josh Harris to think about in terms of big important steps to take when he officially takes over?
Well, I think, just based on that feedback, what I would say is that the location is probably going to be the most significant, right? Because, like, really, legitimately, I'm not just saying this because I played here for 6 years, but the practice field is probably fine. And what I mean by that is that location, while the real estate there is very expensive, there's plenty of space to put another building if you needed to. You could put a hard cover and have an indoor field there. Like, there's plenty of space. So in terms of location, you don't really need to be frantically searching for a new spot just to search for a new spot. However, like to your point, I think it's really important that, like, if you are going to try and make it a practice facility and the stadium in the same location, like, you need to kind of determine that first, right? So, the one thing that I've been hearing a lot of fans kick around, a lot of analysts kick around is like, we want it to be at RFK again, right? And I would love that. That would be great. I think that would be great for fans. It'd be great for the nostalgia. It'd be great for kind of rebranding and establishing a new identity, right? If that's the case, then just keep the spot in Ashburn, right? And I'm not saying you have to keep it forever because I think that field, that area, that land is worth a ton of money, right? It's got a tremendous value.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I
interject
understand.
real quick to say, like, as I heard Kime saying this last week, there's a chance that they stay in Loudoun County but sell that specific piece of
Right.
land because it's right across from one Loudoun. Like, there's a huge amount of tech there, and there's like
Yeah.
fiber wiring and all this kind of stuff that's around. So, like, that very specific plot of land could be sold for a buku of money that could
Right.
help pay for the new practice facility somewhere, a couple miles away. That's still very close, convenient to, for players to live, et cetera, but allows for them to kind of start over on space as opposed to that very specific, very, very, rich plot of land.
Right. So I think that that's important to say. But let's say hypothetically they wanted to keep it. They do have enough
Mm,
space there to put in a new building. Everyone knows that gross turf field there. You could easily
yep.
put a building there. Like it would, there's a lot of stuff you can do there. But I do think that selling that spot is probably in the cards at some point because I think it's worth like something insane, in terms of value. But so I think, like, first location and then identity for that new location. Because as much as Dan wanted, Commander's World to be his thing, like with shopping and all that stuff. Like, I don't know if that's Harris's vision. And if that is the vision, then you got to find enough space to accommodate that, and you want a place where players want to live. I think that's the other thing is all the other places that I played, Atlanta was far away from the stadium. Chicago was far away from the stadium. Houston and San Francisco were kind of the practice facility and the stadium were in the same location. I think there's pros and cons to both. I personally kind of living farther away from the stadium because it kind of lets you have a house and, it was suburbs. The real estate value was better as opposed to being in the city where you're kind of, forced to live in a city environment. And that's preference. So, whatever he chooses to do, I'm sure the players will be fine with, just as long as the area isn't like a bad area, because I don't want to be raising my kids or sending them to a bad school or whatever. So I think that's what I would kind of just say. Look for a reasonable area that people want to live in, if that's what you want to do. And then,
Yeah.
so once that's been determined, I think that's the first step. And then if you can get RFK, great. Then you can probably stay in Ashburn or Loudoun County, whatever you prefer. And I think you just kind of move from there. But I think that location element and finding the space to kind of fit your vision for the new stadium is going to be really important. And obviously that goes hand in hand with the RFK thing.
Yeah, definitely. To me, RFK is the best site just geographically. It's at the center. It's fairly accessible. It's accessible by metro. Obviously, there's infrastructure in place from the fact that there's been a stadium there before. Like there's giant parking lots. There is the fields at RFK now. There's kind of that like rec area in the shadow of the stadium. I don't know if they would keep that, whether they would be like, oh, we need that space back from our parking lots. I don't know exactly how the logistics of that would go, but I'm sure
we're not engineers, we're not
right.
architects, right?
I'm not.
But
I'm
like
not going
there
to
is
pretend.
space there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but what I can say is like the fact that there's a metro line right there, that's great for those of us that live in the district and could get there. And it also like helps with traffic, obviously, and all that kind of stuff when you have, and I would assume they would go like a more of a 50,000 seat kind of thing as opposed to a 70, 80,000 seat stadium.
That's the way people are going now. Like, isn't the one in Las Vegas is kind of like that? It's like 60,000,
Yeah.
50,000.
I mean,
Like
Seattle was the model for that. Where it's like, wow, if we do 50 and we pack it out, like, and there's also some cool acoustic stuff in Seattle that makes it so specifically loud, like the way the stands are built and the sound bounces.
yeah.
It's very cool. And you could obviously try to recreate some of that. But if 50,000 people don't have to drive to the game, then your traffic situation's a lot better. Like it's still going to be messy.
Right.
But it's accessible from Maryland. It's accessible from Virginia. It's accessible from DC, as opposed to like if they build this thing in Dumfries, then, getting there is going to suck unless you live in Dumfries. Like, okay, cool. It's more convenient for the fans that live in Southern or Central Virginia to come up from Richmond. But like, you alienate your Maryland fan base.
And also like, I think this is like the Washington team, and
right.
so I think you want it kind of centrally located. I mean,
yeah.
to that.
I mean, you can talk about the specific of like Dumfries is the equivalent of what they have in San Francisco. Like
it's like on the same area. It's like
because Santa Clara is a solid 45 minutes south of San Francisco.
I think it's more than that. It's San Jose is 45 minutes to an hour and a half depending on traffic. Like it's a good little ways, and
so if you live in Marin County now we're getting into Bay Area geography, but like if you live in Marin or Oakland, east or north of the city of San Francisco, like getting down to Santa Clara is awful.
Yeah.
And if there was a team that was in north of, San Francisco, like over time, you're probably leaking some of your fan base to that team.
And so I will say, like when that stadium was built, I'm glad you brought that up because I had just gotten there maybe a year or two after. They were having a really hard time selling tickets to that stadium. Like they had just been pretty good, maybe 2 or 3 years prior. They'd moved the stadium. They thought everyone was going to kind of travel down with them. And they just didn't. Like the hardcore fans didn't come down there because they upped the seat prices and they wanted to make it feel like more of a corporate environment. And so again, like those are decisions that the Heritage Group has got to make is what kind of feel do you want the stadium to have? And so obviously like that, I think that'll impact the location too. Do you want it near like, kind of new money and have it kind of be a wine and cheese crowd as opposed to a beer and brats crowd? Because like, maybe then this Loudoun County stadium idea isn't a bad idea. You make a small stadium, ticket prices are crazy. Businesses buy seats as kind of like, this is where we take clients for business meetings and stuff. And again, that's just a totally different feel. But again, those are the types of the decisions that are kind of looming, in lieu of the new stadium.
Yeah. Well, the thing I was going to say too, with like the geography element is like, do you really want to alienate Maryland? Because the Ravens are there now. And like, if you're a kid growing up who never gets to go to a game because it's an hour and a half to the Commander's site in Dumfries and it's 45 minutes to M&T Bank to go watch Lamar Jackson, presuming that he's still there. I don't know, like convenience becomes a factor at some point. And if you're a parent, like, you could be a diehard fan, but like, your kids going to school with half Ravens fans, half Commander, like all that kind of stuff. So I think that the more centrally located you can be, the better. And obviously that probably also leads to practice facility somewhere else. You could do the practice facility in Landover too, because they own that land, presuming that's a part of the sale. That Dan isn't going to keep that land for some reason. But presuming that and he shouldn't, because that's where they're going to have to play till like 2027 at least anyway, with FedEx. So, I would that from a convenience standpoint, in terms of getting to the stadium, Landover would make a lot of sense to build a practice facility out there. I just don't know in terms of like a quality of life thing. I think players would much rather live in, all due respect to our friends in Maryland, and specifically that like neighborhood, but the quality of life and everything is going to be a lot better out in Loudoun County, where guys live now compared to if they moved everything to Landover.
That was something that I was talking to my buddies in Miami, and they have a stadium like in the city, and the practice facility is kind of nearby, but everyone lives like 45 minutes away and drives in because the area directly around the stadium is not.
Yeah, Hard Rock Stadium's in a weird spot.
Yeah, not overly nice. So I think I don't know if that's going to affect anybody long term, but I as a player personally, I want to live relatively close to the practice facility and feel very like, oh, I can get to work whenever I need to get to work. And I know not everyone feels that way, but that's something that I hope they consider with the new location.
Yeah, definitely. So my based off nothing prediction is that the RFK site's going to be worked on. There will be like other stuff that is there. I think they're also. I'll say this too. I've heard, variations of this floated as well, that they could do something at the RFK site similar to what they have at the Star, and in Frisco, which Dallas's facility, where you have the big stadium, but you also have a practice facility that serves as kind of a multi-use, like you have a small stadium basically as well, right? And could you host high school football there? Could you have exhibition type of events there? Could the Washington Spirit play there? NWSL, like you get another pro team involved, or like if they build tennis courts or something, like
Sure.
have, the annual tennis event that comes through, like some kind of, you talk about like the village environment where it's not necessarily, they do have a mall at Frisco. But like I've heard that bantied about as well, that you have kind of a multi-purpose thing. You have a practice facility in terms of an actual field or fields that also then is used for actual competitions. And it's kind of like a 10,000 or smaller seat stadium where like in Texas, the way they do it is the high school football championships are played there every year. Could you do something like that? And I've heard that bantied about as well. So there's a lot of options, obviously, as Josh Harris takes over. He'll be asked about all this, and there's a lot of government red tape that has to be specifically for that site cut through as well. They've got to get permission, then they got to buy it, and then they have to build on it, or get a lease and then go on it. And then in terms of the actual construction, like they're going to be at FedEx for a while anyway. That's another thing to think about. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.